Yuk. Again, I'm glad to be back. It is indeed an honor privilege to be back to Gajah Mada, and especially welcoming all of you to this very interesting program. When I heard about it from Pak Didi about the Global Summer Week. Global Summer Week, where students from places that often so far join study here. By the way, how many of you who are here visiting Indonesia for the first time? Can you raise your hand? First time. How many of you thank you. Raise your hand when you're from Indonesia. Raise your hand. Okay. So it's quite a balance of international students and domestic students. And I hope the summer experience will last long. I had the similar experience when I was a student, joining a summer program, and that experience stays with me until today. And in fact, the subject that I was invited to speak on sustainability, green economy, green leadership, is something that is so close, so dear to me. I was still a student in the Faculty of Economics, 1993, third year, entering a competitions, an essay competition, writing competitions, to get a scholarship to do a summer program, just like this. And the summer program was in Sophia University in Tokyo. And I was fortunate that I got the scholarship. I spent a summer in Sophia University. But the essay that I wrote is about how do we integrate two words into one action. What are the two words? Economy and ecology. Because then economy goes into one direction, ecology goes in other directions. How do we integrate these two that has the same root, oikos nomos and oikos logos? But for some reasons, it diverted its journey between economy and ecology. And the other subject that was so relevant to the assignment that I'm given today is when I finished my undergraduate program, we had to do a thesis. In Bahasa Indonesia, we call it skripsi, undergraduate thesis. And my undergraduate thesis at that time was about multinational corporations and its environmental policies. The question is simple. We have so many international multinational corporations operating in Indonesia. The question is, are they operating using the environmental standard of the home country or the country in which they have operations? Because some of them were coming from first industrial countries, operating in a third world industrial countries. And the challenge is, do you want to lower your standard or do you want to maintain your high standard? And it was a very interesting subject that I studied with. But again, when I received the letter, I said, inshallah, I'll come back and discussing the subject that is so close to me personally and professionally. I prepared remarks, and I have also given to Ibu Arizona the lecture notes, and she is welcome to distribute to all of you that you may be able to read, contemplate. But I will go through this and then we have discussions at the end. We are living through one of the most turning point in the human history. The climate is breaking down much faster than we expected. Inequality is widening, and people around the world are losing trust in government, losing trust in corporations, and even losing trust to each other. So this is not just a time of change. only. This is a time for the people to demand leadership with clarity, leadership with courage and directions. So sustainability is no longer a distant goal or a topic for academic debates. In fact, it has become an urgent mission for business, for cities, for countries, and for each and every one of us. So we must now build systems that not only generate values, but preserve life. This means changing how we think about growth, how we think about success, how we think about leadership itself. So the subject that I've been asked to focus on is on leadership and sustainability. So I'll address that issues. The old ways of leading is based on short-term profits, competitions, sometimes control. This is no longer works in a complex world of today. We have shared problems, and the issue of climate change, it's no longer issues that is faced by certain countries, but it is a worldwide issues. It doesn't recognize company boundaries, it doesn't recognize national boundaries, and we need a different kind of leadership. Leadership that can connect across sectors, leadership that can connect across interests, and can connect across cultures. That kind of leadership began not with a plan, but with a story. So the term I'll be using is narrative leadership. Narrative leadership is about helping people to see bigger picture and to place them within that big picture. It's about offering visions of the futures that feels possible, that feels meaningful and worth working for. Because people don't just follow strategies, they follow stories. It is not only about strategies. And without a story of where we are going, no one will walk with us. So if you don't share the narratives, the story, even though you have strategy, it doesn't inspire people to be with you. So let's think about it. Every major shift in society, whether this is human rights, technology, or public health, it doesn't begin with budget. It begins with beliefs. Someone had to imagine a better future and say it loud. That imaginations, shared through a compelling story, those are what inspired others to act. So before we design policies or design product, we must design narratives that move people. This is why storytelling is not a soft skill. It is now a survival skill. A strong narrative can unite people with different roles, different backgrounds, and different goals around shared purpose. It can help investors to understand long-term values. It helps employees to see why their work matters, and to help communities feel seen and included. And this turned big goals into human missions. And if you look back throughout history, most transformative leaders, all of them were storytellers. All of them storytellers. Barack Obama spoke about hope. It's just one word, hope. Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand call it kindness, be kind. Nelson Mandela invited South Africans to imagine reconciliations that had never existed in their country. Reconciliation, just one word. These weren't just speeches. They were invitations to walk into different future, and they walked into the futures together. So today we face our own invitations. What is that? To redesign how we live, how we produce, how we care for one another, and how we care for the earth. That is hard and complicated task indeed. But it begins, as always, with story that is told with honesty, with shared values and caring. So narratives precede change. In the decades that will define our century, the futures belong to those who can tell a story worth believing in. So for all of us, we need to be storytellers. Now, why narrative leadership matters in sustainability? The challenge we face in sustainability are not technical puzzles to be solved by experts alone, but they are human challenges rooted in how we live, how we value, and how we relate to each other, and how we relate to our planet. That means solution must speak more than logic, and they must also speak to the heart, not only to the brain. And this is also meaning that what narrative does, it reaches places that data cannot reach. Let me underline. Data gives you the facts, but it's narratives that give us the meaning. Without narratives, those facts doesn't have meaning, doesn't provoke us to make actions. We can know the numbers, we can understand the models, and still do nothing about it. And it's nothing new to know the numbers, because information without emotions rarely moves people. It's not the informations that make you move, it's the emotions that makes you move. A well-crafted story translates complexity into clarity. Translate complexity into urgency for action. And it helps us to feel what data is trying to say. So, when it comes to the issue of sustainability effort often involve multi-stakeholders, multiple government, corporations, community, consumers, individuals. All of these stakeholders, each comes with different goals, different language, different fears, different hopes. But the narratives can serve as bridge to allow them to understand each other, to align intentions, and to move forward together. But let me also underline, this is not about simplifying the truth or about making it shareable. When sustainability is framed only in technical terms, give you an example, carbon target, ESG metrics, regulatory compliance, it can feel so distant and just simply measures of obligations to do. But when sustainability is framed as moral journey, as shared responsibility, or as legacy to the future generations, it becomes personal. You know, we all realize that people don't mobilize for checklists. They mobilize because the cause that speak to who they are. It's the cause that people inspire to move. You know Greta Thunberg. She said, simple line, our house is on fire. It's a simple line, just 5 words, and yet it ignited a global movement. She didn't use a graph, she didn't use policy brief, there is no charts, but she used a story. She used a simple and powerful metaphor that turned climate change into something you could feel, something you could imagine, and then something that sparked you to act. This is in contrast with years of scientific reports, and it's nothing new. I remember 1992, I was still a student. There was a report on sustainability, and there was a world conference in Rio de Janeiro about the threat of global warming. It was 1992, more than 30 years ago. But you know, this may be full of evidence, but often ignored. It's not that people don't care, it's because caring needs container, and narrative is the container. Data, again, without emotion, is simply informations. And because narrative is its container, it is even more urgent to look at narrative as keyword in spreading our understanding and our concern about environment. But also, let me underline that narrative is key to building trust. In the age of skepticism, people want to know not just what you're doing, but why we're doing it. A good story, being told consistently, being told in a transparency way, becomes a signal of integrity, and it is sending a message that we are not just ticking boxes, but we are taking this personally. So, when business leaders who adopt sustainable model often face resistance from who? From shareholders, from internal teams, from markets that often expect quick return. Narrative leadership helps them to reframe sustainability not as cost, but as long-term investment in what? In relevance, in resilience, in reputations. And it helps to transfer doubt into beliefs. So in many ways, narrative is a strategy before a strategy. So you create narratives as a strategy before you start outlining a strategy to tackle environmental challenge. Because it sets the emotional and the ethical tone that will shape how everyday actions is received. And a sustainable future requires deep system change. But systems don't move unless people do. And people move only when the story makes sense to them. So we must also remember that people are not inspired by perfections, but they are inspired by honesty, inspired by struggle, inspired by courage. It's not simply perfections. And a narrative that admits complexity of the journey and still choose to walk on that journey is much more powerful than one that pretends to have all the answers. So in this case, leaders who tell the truth and invite others to join in will always go much further. But on the other hand, when narratives is missing, sustainability becomes simply a checklist. It's a checklist about something to measure, something to report, but not something to believe in. When narrative is present, sustainability becomes mission. It becomes something that people can connect to. It's something that people can contribute to, and something that people can be proud of it. So that shift from compliance into conviction is where real change is made, where real change is began. Can I continue and I'll respond? So the question is not whether we have enough data. We do, we have enough data. The real question is whether we have the courage, we have the clarity to tell the story that the data is asking us to tell. Because in the end, fact informs, but stories inspire. And the inspirations that turn concern into commitment. I have some experiences that I like to share. I will not go too long, but I had the privilege to be entrusted to manage the city of Jakarta, a city of 11 million people, the largest city in the southern hemisphere, and a city that contributes about 8% of Indonesian GDP, and one of the most condensed cities in the world. But also the city where massive disparities is present. Disparities of various different variables. And our challenge when we manage that city is there's so many stakeholders. We need to come up with a narrative that can move everyone into set missions, into same goals, into same purpose. And the narratives is about equality. City that is created for everyone. That city that belongs to everyone. That was the narratives. And then with that narratives, we invite everyone to get involved. And with that narratives, we invite the bureaucracy to translate that into programs. So I often use 3 different levels of process into actions. Ideas translate into narratives, and narratives translate into action. So action is the 3rd step. The first step is ideas, narrative, action. In bahasa Indonesia, gagasan, narasi, karya. If we focus so much on actions, no narratives, we may not have shared purpose. But without idea, narratives can have no meanings. So we start with idea. The idea of in our experience is on creating a city that belongs to everyone, translate that into narrative, translate that into actions in various different departments. Give me one example. Equity in transportations. When you look at roads that is built, if you come to visit Jakarta today, you may be seeing sidewalks for pedestrians. But when we started our tenure in Jakarta, there is no such a pedestrian area for pedestrian. Almost all roads were for drivers, not for walkers. There is no place for walkers. So you go to main road in Jakarta, you have to drive to enjoy the road. But if you want to walk, there's no place to walk. So you have to have purchasing power to buy vehicles to enjoy the city. But if you don't have purchasing power to buy vehicles, you don't enjoy the city. So when that message of equality, that the city belongs to everyone, let's make sure that even walker can enjoy our city. We built no less than 300 kilometers of sidewalks across Jakarta in 4 years. And when that's done, there's a different feeling. And in the process of the making, we engage everyone. Why? Because this is not only government program, but this is movement for everyone. So it's not only participations, but it becomes collaborations. Now, let me jump to some of the steps that is needed to take action on this. I have written in the notes about recent global leaders who led with narratives. I mentioned about Barack Obama, and then Jacinda Ardern, also Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever. I'll ask you, Arizona, to share the notes, and you may be able to go through some of that. I'll just go to the steps to create the narratives. One of the biggest misconceptions about narrative leadership is that it is a one-way broadcast. It's from the leaders to the followers, from the leaders to the community, leaders to society, leaders to government. And in fact, it is not the case. Most powerful narratives don't just reach people, it activates people. They don't just communicate message, but they build movement. And not only happens when the narrative becomes shared, and it actually promotes further actions. In that way, if I may say, narrative is not a megaphone, it is like a signal tower, allowing others to transmit, translate, expand stories in their own context. And if I may suggest, to look at leaders, a good one doesn't just tell the story. The good leaders write the first chapters, but also hand the pens to others to continue writing the stories. So leaders is not the only storyteller, but everyone were invited to be storytellers. So in our experience in Jakarta, when we work managing the city, we adopted a concept of City 4.0, where public, private, and civic sectors collaborate. In the city management, there is City 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. The difference is how government view themselves. Government as regulator, government as service provider, government as participant, and government as collaborator. Those are the stages. When government as collaborator, then you invite everyone to collaborate. But when government simply as regulator, you don't invite people to collaborate. When government serves simply as service provider, you don't invite people to collaborate. So that approach requires leadership that send narratives so that the public in general are willing to collaborate. So when narrative is clear and when narrative is open, it creates space for others to actually involve and find their roles. And it shows them how their daily work, even small, can contribute to a bigger purpose. And narratives also help us to move from ego system to ecosystems, from isolated efforts to interdependent collaborations. And they help people to see leadership is not limited to those with titles or with budget, but everyone can lead because everyone can create and everyone can carry story forward. So this kind of leadership will require humility. It means stepping back, listen deeply, and allowing others to reshape the story as it spreads. It's no longer about being the loudest voice in the room, but it's about creating a room where many voices can be heard and many hands can be a help. So if I may outline, let's remember that we don't just invite people to listen, but invite people to create stories, to continue our stories. And for that, if I may underline a few items. We're talking about the future and sustainability. Let me underline here that future is not something we enter, but it's something that we shape. We shape our future. And the tools we use to shape it is not policy or capital, but meaning. Meaning is what makes people care, meaning what makes people stay, and meaning what makes people act, even in difficult times. And meaning comes from stories that we tell. So sustainable leadership is not only about what we build, but what we believe. It's about the culture we cultivate, the values we transmit, and the futures we dare to imagine. So leadership today is not about commanding actions, but about animating convictions. The challenges of this century is not short term. Climate breakdown, inequality, and polarizations were not the kind of problems that can be solved with quick fixes. It requires long horizons. It requires steady and consistent actions. And for that, it is the story that keeps people walking even when the road gets hard. And this is the age where it requires patience. And that's why leadership must begin with questions: what future are we inviting people into? Because when the future feels empty or exclusive, people will feel disconnect. And when the future feels sad, worthy, and just, people will respond with engagement, and they will bring others along with them. It's story, scale, belief. In business, in government, and communities, this principle holds true that people no longer follow leaders simply their positions, but they follow leaders whose narratives resonate with their hopes and whose actions align with their words. In this case, consistency builds credibility. So, in tempting to focus on metrics only, like carbon numbers, GDP growth, shareholder return, these are past approach. But sustainable model is not just a smart one, it has to be a soulful one, that it connects profit with purpose, connects performance with principles, and narrative is the thread that binds all of those together. So if we want to make a system change, we have to start by changing what people believe is possible. That's why the first move in transformations is always narrative, not because story replaces strategy, but because stories prepare the ground for creating strategies. So around the world today, if we don't reflect deeply, then we see situations where there's so many innovations, and we don't lack of innovations. There's so many innovations, but we lack of integrations of those innovations. We don't lack of ideas. There's so many ideas, but we lack belief that they can take roots. Belief is born from stories, and not a fantasy, but a future rooted in courage, honesty, and self-responsibility. So whatever role you play, in your organizations, in your circle, in your groups, remember, be a leader of the futures, meaning be a leader that can create narratives, that can create stories, that can create narratives to invite people to join, to work together, and to achieve shared mission, shared purpose.